Hi, Fred. How you doing?
Good. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. It's such an honor. Look at your shirt. I love it.
For the occasion.
Perfect. I love the LGBT Alliance. Yeah, so I just wanted to have a little chat. I figured we wouldn't broadcast it live. We could just record it and, I'll post it later. But maybe let me start by just briefly introducing you, in case there's anybody who doesn't already know who you are. But Fred Sargeant here was living in New York City in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and was active in gay liberation activism and politics. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and Fred very famously bore witness to the Stonewall riots. He was there in person during those, and Fred is also was involved in the creation of the first Pride March in New York City in 1970, a year after Stonewall. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So Fred, you're quite a hero, and you've left a huge impression on gay rights activism. And here we are in the year 2020, and it feels like we have to do it all over again in some ways, doesn't it? Yeah, so I'm really so glad that you've decided to join Twitter and take up social media and start talking about things. When exactly did you start speaking up again?
Well, it was back in December. I started picking up on the changes in the history of Stonewall as it was being related today around this time last year, and it concerned me. So I thought, well, I need to look at more of this, and I did quite a bit of reading over the summer and fall, and when I felt I had learned enough about what had been going on, I decided I would step out and do something on Twitter, refuting some of the stories that had come up that are patently untrue and are easily proven to be untrue. There's a narrative now about what happened back then that bears no relation to what actually did happen, and it erases all of the lesbians and gay men who created the modern gay rights movement, or gay liberation movement, as we called it then, and instead put in place a group of people who played no role. I'm certainly not saying that there weren't drag queens there, but they had no interest in the radical politics that we were associated in. Militant gay rights activism was a new thing just before Stonewall, in the first few years before then, and it was taking hold. And so we were able to build on what happened at Stonewall because we already had a growing infrastructure in place. Now, the way the story is told, there was nothing before, and some trans women of color inspired us and led us, and nothing could be further from the truth, because these were people that we didn't associate with, primarily because we didn't have time for the drugs, we didn't have time for the antics. We were very serious about the politics, and they weren't. And I know some of them went on to form a cell within the Gay Liberation Front, but even there, if you check with Gay Liberation Front members that are still alive today, you won't find anything said about their contributions at the time. They were there for whatever they could get.
Now you're talking about, are we referring to drag queens and cross-dressers here, or are we talking about what would be much more akin to modern day transgender, which really didn't exist at all at the time?
Didn't exist at all. That was just not a thing.
Yeah. So, but what? Yeah, it's interesting. There's this sort of almost it's a meme, that a Black trans woman threw the first brick at Stonewall. Of course, there were no bricks at Stonewall, and there were no trans people there either. Transsexualism and transvestism really weren't connected to the gay rights movement at all at the time. Isn't that right?
No one's radar. No one knew anything about that. I understand now there may have been some people at the time in New York who were transsexual, but they didn't have any involvement in gay politics at the time.
Yeah,
And
like certainly like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground kind of scene in 1970s
yeah,
New York. There were some transsexuals there who were homosexual transsexuals, I believe. But yeah, it was very different, kind of not related. I don't think anyone in Factory Records, or sorry, in the Warhol's factory was involved in gay liberation, even though they were mighty gay.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a figure named Marsha Johnson. Is that right?
Yeah.
This is a
Malcolm
man
Martin.
who's a drag queen, um, who wasn't trans, never denied that he was a male, but did have a woman's name and wore women's clothes. And did you see that one of those daily Google Doodles was posted in honor of Marsha Johnson? Did you see this?
Yeah, yeah. It's all off the wall.
It just
None
seemed
of
bizarre because this person, I've watched a couple interviews with you, one with the LGBT Alliance and one with Graham Linehan, in which you really went into detail about, you know, what you witnessed on the night of Stonewall. And I think you said that Marsha, she was there, but she showed up at like 1 or 2 in the morning or something like that, and was really a peripheral figure in this whole thing. Isn't that right?
right, very much so. In fact, when I saw her, and it was only briefly, she was down the street towards 7th Avenue, not in front of the bar, which is where we all were, uh, until we were broken up, of course. But I had seen my partner then, Craig Rodwell, watched her drop a bag of soggy garbage on an empty squad car windshield.
Yeah,
And
that is
I
pretty
just
cool
saw
though.
I just saw the other day that that empty bag of garbage has now turned into a bag full of bricks,
Oh my goodness.
knocking out the windshield of the car. You know, and it's on the internet, so you know it's true. You know,
The internet is always true, exactly. But I just find that it looks to me like there are just some activists who see a black person who cross dresses, and they're like, we're going to co-opt this person and say that they're trans and try to put them at the center of Stonewall so that they can make this look like it was trans people of color who were making all the difference. And that story has become so popular. And it just seems like it was deliberately kind of invented.
yeah, there's a lot of piggybacking that I see going on between the trans movement um, and trying to create a bond with the black movement. Uh, and of course, people forget that at that time, our society was so racially stratified that when you look at groups like GLF, um, the group I was involved in, the homophile youth movement, there weren't black members, um, not because we would exclude, but because people just didn't join together.
Yeah. This is the
It wasn't,
1970s, yeah.
you know, it wasn't out of prejudice or anything like that. In fact, many people that were working in GLF worked in the radical black community associated with like the Black Panthers. On Thanksgiving Eve of 1969, I was on a soapbox at Greenwich and 6th Avenue, and I was raising funds for the Black Panther breakfast program. So, you know, we had ties with groups, but they were separate and distinct.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how this story has just been completely, it's such an important part of our history as gay people. So I think it's so important that we we not doctor the story to suit whatever the current causes are. You know, gay rights, we have our own history, and I'm angry that it's being taken away from us and rewritten by, you know, by the trans movement and by other movements. Yeah, taking our history away from us, especially, and I'm so glad that you're going out of your way to highlight how many lesbians were involved and how much work the lesbian community did for gay liberation. Because they really are the ones, they're really getting erased. So I'm so happy to see you going out of your way to, you know, to name specific women who were involved and things like that.
That's so true. And for me, as someone who's lived through all those decades, you know, I see what the lesbian contribution to LGB progress has been. When so many of it, I lost all of my friends back in the 80s and 90s from AIDS, because of AIDS. And it was lesbians that were there caring for them. And it was lesbians who led the the marriage equality movement. It was lesbians who got the first civil union laws passed. So to now hear that we owe everything to people that weren't even at the riot, it frosts me.
Yeah, especially most people don't even really know that, the majority of people who are male who identify as trans aren't even gay. These are straight males. Yeah, but it's interesting to talk what activism must have been like then, militant activism, compared to now. It suddenly dawned on me recently that like activism is really hard. It's hard work. You alienate people, and real activism. You could lose your job, you lose friends. You have to bother people and tell people things that they don't want to hear. So I'm learning this the hard way, jumping into this issue because I feel compelled to, because I feel like I have to. But you see all these activists on the other side, and you see all of these young people who take up all these progressive causes, and they're just getting brownie points from everyone for it. They seem to think that activism means saying the right thing and getting approval from all of your friends and getting approval from authority figures, right?
Lockstep.
Yeah, like when Google and the banks and all the police departments, they're all agreeing with your position, then you're not doing activism at all. It's all these women and people like you speaking up, people like J.K. Rowling and Graham Linehan, of course, who are really putting their money where their mouth is and speaking up to saying something that they know is true and that they know is important, but that is an unpopular thing to say. And I wonder what it was like back in the late 60s and 70s. How did you feel as an activist? Did you alienate people? Was it difficult?
Well, you did. First of all, back then, very few used their real names. I was one of those that did. I used my name. I always have. But it was hard for people to do then because it meant your future. And I wanted to live my future as who I was. And so it was easier for me in that sense where I was that committed. Of course, I was inspired by Craig Rodwell. He really was a pioneer of the time. He was right there with Barbara Giddings and Frank Kameny. And those were the people that set the tone for the modern gay rights movement.
Were these people, these are people who were in like the Daughters of Bilitis and that kind of thing, and the homophile movement? Or were these the more sort of radical?
No, these were, Barbara Giddings was Daughters of Bilitis, but she continued afterwards, not so much as part of the radical politics scene, but she was the person who was responsible, or most responsible, for getting the 1973 change in the DSM regarding homosexuality no longer being considered a mental illness. So these were all people that were very integral to what was happening then. And we've forgotten all of them, and somehow it's all boiled down to a trans woman of color with a brick.
And even gay in general is now, you can't say same-sex attracted anymore. I find that shocking. And I tell people this: people who are outside, people who are not really actively involved in this movement, in activism right now, who don't really know what's going on. You tell them things like, the leading gay rights organizations are all saying that the word homosexual is problematic, and you can't even say same-sex attracted, and they'd be like, I don't believe you. Like, it's just not true. You're clearly crazy. And then you show them like. It's just, it's just unbelievable that gay is just being souped up into this gender movement where everything is about erasing the distinction between male and female. They think that that's somehow progressive. But of course, that eliminates homosexuality. If everybody's pansexual and boy and girl doesn't have any meaning anymore, how can you be homosexual? How can you, it's just, none of this makes any sense. And lesbians are really, again, the ones facing the brunt of it, of course, because all of these heterosexual male trans people want to be validated as women and have sex with women because they're straight, which means they're targeting the lesbian community, and they're trying to enter into lesbian relationships, even though these are intact
That's
heterosexual
how I
males.
got involved with J.K. Rowling when I wrote about Alex Drummond and pointed out that he said he was a lesbian, and that was refuted by Pink News. And I was able to show that Pink News actually had written 5 years earlier about a BuzzFeed story in which, of course, Alex Drummond said he was a lesbian. So, their stories keep changing, and they keep trying to make the story fit the new dynamic of what they're trying to present. And pinning them down can be difficult, but not impossible. They leave all the same sort of records. And that's what I've been working with.
I was so glad. I try to never even bring up Pink News because I don't want to give them more attention than they deserve. But I was so glad to see when you pointed out that Pink News has been it's been delisted, it's been red flagged by Wikipedia. So they're essentially officially fake news. That was a delight.
I call them hashtag fake Pink News.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, the malicious intent there when they tried to libel me a few days ago. They tried to smear me as akin to a pedophile for pointing out that the puberty blocker regimen for gender non-conforming kids is causing serious damage to kids' future sex lives. There, I said, like, these kids are going to grow up into adults who don't have any sexual function and can't feel sexual pleasure, and that's just being swept under the rug. Yeah.
I got peripherally involved in that when I started speaking about the person, and he's now locked down his Twitter account and done all the usual things because he was caught, hanging out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me more about you. I know you live in Vermont. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
You're married, and do you have kids?
Yes, 2.
Nice. And there must be they're grown adults and they live in Vermont too, or they live in the States?
My daughter's 40 and my son is he's just turned 40.
And then when you, shortly after Stonewall and the beginning of the gay pride marches, you went on to you had a really fascinating career in the police force as a hostage negotiator. Is that right?
That's right.
That sounds amazing. But I have a very important question, though. You've probably heard this many times. It's really important. When you were in the police forces, did you ever have the rank sergeant? Were you ever sergeant?
For 1 year.
I had to know. Yeah. That must have been fun. It was you were born to be a sergeant.
I actually have one of my old name tags that the guys gave me that said, of course, SGT.
Brilliant. You don't need LGBT because you're SGT. But you posted something on Twitter. It was a poster it was an advertisement for the first Pride March.
That's right.
Oh, it was gorgeous. It was so beautifully designed. And I remember I asked you in the thread on Twitter who had designed the poster. And you said something interesting. You said that information is lost to time. It must have been so strange. Did you have any sense when you were doing all that stuff at the time that it would end up becoming, part of, such a fundamental part of history?
No, we didn't really think that way. And that's evidenced by the fact that there are very few records left. I know you can look through Foster Gunnison's papers at the University of Connecticut, and he did collect a lot of things. And of course, Craig had some things in there at the New York Public Library, and other people saved small amounts, but there's no big trove that I'm aware of papers.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? I wonder how the future is going to look back at this time we're in right now, with organizations like the LGBT Alliance starting up to reform a grassroots, gay and lesbian rights movement and claw it back from these straight males who have completely taken over.
One difference that I'd like to point out is that back then we had no straight allies. This time around, and of course, we were our own allies. So we were the people that we were our own glue. And now I see much of the pressure against same-sex activism as coming from within the group, and we now have straight allies that are helping us. So it's very odd for me. It was unanticipated that things would turn out this way, but pleasantly so.
Yeah, it's true. There's been all sorts of strange reframing of power dynamics and alliances. I'm seeing so much. I consider myself very much on the left, and I see so much in the right-wing press that is standing up for same-sex attraction and for the rights of women to have safe spaces, and that just seems unusual to me to see all of these very this messaging that's aligned with gay rights and women's rights, feminist gay stuff, being defended in things like the National Review, magazines that I thought would never go near this. There's just a trove of books that seem to be coming out right now on the subject, especially of children being coerced into transitioning. And a lot of them are by conservative authors or centrist authors, not the kinds of people I would have expected to be writing, defending, gender nonconforming and gay children. So it's strange, isn't it? It's just not the same.
It's very strange. It's something that I've been watching with a little concern, of course. I'm not conservative at all, and to see this kind of overlap is interesting after so many decades. I say it often that it's really something how the gender ideology has caused some traditional barriers to fall, and we now find ourselves, for instance, the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Sher, that's published by Regenerate Press, and most people won't know what that is, but they posted the Swift book.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, they're deeply conservative. And, I had a few reservations as soon as I saw it, but I thought, this is what's happening. This is precisely what happens when something becomes so extreme that people who have few commonalities actually develop one. And that's what we see going on here. Now, of course, we're all labeled as being conservatives because of who they are, but nobody's labeling them as being gay.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. The way that we are being labeled as conservatives, I find so strange. I get into arguments with people online, and they will literally tell me, well, you're obviously just a Christian conservative. And I'd be like, no, I'm a gay, lefty atheist. And they'd be like, no, you're a Christian conservative. Like the cognitive dissonance for them to understand that the people who don't agree with them are, anti-conservative, gay, not religious at all. They just can't, so they have to tell themselves. They're literally telling me that I have to be a Christian conservative because it's just impossible.
One by saying, I was voting for Bernie before you were born.
That's a great one. Of course, you're from Vermont. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, they just don't see it. I think it's because they've just stolen the narrative. The traditional enemies of gay rights have always been the Christian conservatives, right?
Yeah.
Think of the children and all of that. So they're just trying to take the template, the whole storyline of gay rights, and turn it into trans rights. But it's not the same thing at all. Gay rights is about leaving us alone, so we can just marry who we want and not get fired, and have partnerships, romantic and sexual relationships with people of the same sex if we want to. But trans rights is about making everybody else change their own definition of what a man and a woman is. Right. It's about making everybody have to see you the way you want to be seen. And that's just fundamentally different. Like same-sex marriage laws didn't apply just to gays. Anybody can get same-sex married. It's just you wouldn't want to unless you were gay, of course. So it's not something you're not forcing other people to get married. You just created a law that just makes it easier for gays to get married if they choose to, and can be completely ignored by everybody else. But these self-ID, gender recognition laws are making women and girls taking their rights away from them to choose whether or not they want to have a man in their private space, someone that they perceive to be a man, right? It's really all about taking rights away from women and girls and from homosexuals, you know? Yeah, it's just a very different thing.
And demanding that young women particularly have to ignore the fact that they're dealing with a man and accept that man as being a woman. And you know, there's just so much that you can ask the human mind to take on and say that's okay. And it's not okay, particularly when, you know, their opportunity in sports is being stripped away from them by someone who in male sports would probably be mediocre or less. But because of the advantage, they're taking all the trophies.
Yeah, none of this makes any sense, especially with sports, because there's no reason to have men's and women's separate sports categories, except that we know that male and female bodies are very, very different. But all of these people, they seem to have suddenly thought that the reason we have separate categories of sports for men and women is to validate everybody's gender. You know, girls just want to play with girls and boys just want to play with boys. That's ridiculous. And same with changing rooms. Like, changing rooms aren't there because girls like to get naked in front of girls. It's because of the safety, right?
That's
safety
right.
and privacy for women and girls. And this is based on your sex, not on your announced pronouns.
Right.
The kinds of people who are going to take these opportunities are the kinds of people you don't want in your space a lot of the time.
And there are too many examples of people that shouldn't be in those spaces that we're now supposed to ignore as they're being somehow singular, when they're not singular. They're part of a very large group. When you look at prison statistics, you know, there's so much that you can look at that just cries out no.
Yeah, and so many people have told themselves that you're not allowed to say that, because then you're saying that trans people are bad. And that's not true. We're saying that male people are a threat to female people, regardless of how they identify. You know, it doesn't matter whether you are or aren't really trans, or how trans you say you are, or what you've done. If you're male, you have a high likelihood of being dangerous to females.
Trans women continue after transition to commit crimes at precisely the same rate as the general male population.
That's right, yeah. Which is completely different than the female population. Yeah. They're not women, statistically, criminally speaking. These are still just as male as they were, you know?
Well,
yeah.
And that's a whole other issue, where if you start to break that down, that statistical gathering down in that fashion, then your statistics are going to mean nothing.
Yeah.
It just becomes a mush.
Yeah, and I can almost see, I think people who are on board with this, outsiders who are on board with this sort of gender replacing sex in terms of how we divide safe spaces, maybe they think that by getting rid of the difference between men and women will mean that we're equalizing men and women. But of course, that's not true. First, you have to make a society where men don't commit crimes against women at such alarming rates. Then you can start talking about loosening up the safety precautions. They seem to be going at it backwards. First, get rid of all the safety barriers, and then we'll just pretend everything's going to be fine. And of course, this is going to cause so much harm to genuine sympathetic transsexuals who have been working to build allegiance with women, to earn trust, you know. Yeah.
There are many, many fine transsexuals and transgender people. I have a number of followers from both communities, and they're not the people that I talk about so much. Maybe I should talk more, but again, I'm a same-sex rights activist, not a world activist for all communities. So I try to deal with them as we should deal with each other at all times. But I still point out that there are many bad transgender activists that do a lot of damage to our community, again, going back to sports, going back to changing areas, going back to how we have to interrelate with each other. The pronouns just being an example of that we have to speak in a certain way or we are thus transphobic. Well, no, I'll speak the way I want to, as I have all my life.
That's right, yeah. And I'll sleep with who I want to. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not even gonna consider you as a potential sex partner if you're female, and that's my right. You know, I was beaten up so many times as a kid for being gay and gender nonconforming and effeminate. I was homeless for a year. I never got to go to high school. I fought and I paid for the right to be who I am, and I'm not gonna let this, you know, I'm not gonna stand for this. You know, this angers me a lot to be told that I'm supposed to be considering sex partners because they feel that they aren't happy as females and they want to try to present as males. I'll respect that, sure. You know, I'll try to respect you as long as you're a decent person, but I still see you as female, and that's my right. And I'm not going to consider you as a sex partner because I'm not sexually attracted to females at all. You know, yeah. But the other big one around same-sex attraction and rights is all of these children, trans kids.
Right.
Every time I see one of these, you know, trans kids, I see like a trans girl. I see a little effeminate gay boy. I see a young me, you know, who has conservative parents who are freaking out and trying to trans the gay away. And the statistics bear that out. The statistics have always shown that in any generation, if there was a very effeminate little boy who was distressed about being a boy because he got along with the girls and he liked girly things, he would have grown out of it and, you know, in all likelihood would have ended up an effeminate homosexual male, you know. In any generation, we can just see this with our own eyes. So this idea that suddenly we've decided, like we were all born yesterday, like we never knew, like suddenly all these effeminate little boys were saying, well, you must be a girl.
That is part of what brought me into this, because I you know, it was apparent to me right off that so many of these kids, if they were just allowed to grow up, they would turn out to be LGB. But no, they were going to be put on puberty blockers. Some would get surgery and be, you know, just mutilated, all for an ideology that really stole their youth and stole their future. They established a relationship with the medical community that I didn't establish until 10 years ago. But this is happening to kids in their teens. And they will never be separate from the medical community because of all the continuing problems, the brain development, the bone density issues, and all the other things that are being done to them that I think we need to step up and stop.
Yeah, these are going to be lifelong patients, and they're going to have health problems. They're going to have probably reduced average lifespans because of all of the issues around, you know, I think there are heart problems you get with these, you know, with cross-sex hormones your whole life. Yeah, like we have to put a stop to this. It's so shocking. But this is such a hard one. I don't know how to, because if you're a parent of a distressed kid, you want to do something to stop your kid's distress right now, right? And what they have to understand is you have to help your kid get through that stress and come out the other end, you know, and get over their dysphoria and their distress at being gender nonconforming so that they can live the rest of their life as a happy, healthy, and in all likelihood homosexual person. And we have to work on making society more, you know, more amenable to gender nonconforming little boys and girls, so that they're not so distressed about it. And instead what we're doing is we're going the opposite direction. We're just fixing the kids instead of fixing society, you know?
Yeah. Well, we're also facing a very well-developed and financed organization that will make a lot of money medicalizing and through surgeries of young children, and of course the continuing care that they'll need throughout their life. And you can see the ties within various groups. For instance, going back to Pink News, the husband of the publisher is a doctor, and he was involved with mermaids until it was pointed out that his role as an advisor to mermaids presented a conflict of interest for his husband, the publisher. So he's kind of gone into the background, but he's still writing papers advocating for the medicalization of children and getting medical support for those endeavors. So, you know, there's a lot of interplay between all these groups that, you know, we really do need to look at better, and hopefully be able to publicize in a more, I'm not sure what the best way to put it, not an expose, but we really do need to look at how deeply tied into aspects of the gay community the transgender medicalization complex is.
100%. And it's so I'm shocked that so many gay men are still on board with this. I had this idea. I wanted to draw a little comic and post it on Twitter, but I can't draw to save my life. I can't draw for shit. So I tried to draw it up and I just couldn't do it. But I would have 4 panels. Picture it. The first panel is the interior of a gay bar, and it's filled with rainbow flags, and it's filled with people dancing and having fun, and there's a bartender standing there having a big smile on his face. And it said, the headline is like gay bar circa 2010. And then the second panel, it's the same interior, but it says gay bar circa 2020. And half of the rainbow flags have been replaced with trans flags. And now all the people on the dance floor are sort of a little bit more gender bending in their appearance. And then the third panel, it says gay bar circa 2030. And it's just the bartender standing there in an empty room. And he's got a thought bubble that says, where did all the gays go? And then the fourth panel, he's standing outside of the bar and it says closing soon, coming soon, oh, closed down, coming soon, trans medical clinic. And it goes, oh, because there's all these kids, this generation of young gays and lesbians, they're all being diverted into trans. So I think it's going to have a literal impact on the number of gays and lesbians who exist in the world in 10 or 20 years. I think there's like the lesbians, especially already, there are no lesbians in high schools. There's just trans boys, right. None. They're all opting out because that term is considered, it's considered pornified and undignified, and they don't like it. So they're all choosing to be trans boys instead, which is a term that connotes, righteous activism and, whatever.
Well, they'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, God, it's it's going to be weird in 10 years when there's no gay people left.
Transition stories now that you can't ignore that factor any longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the detransitioners, gosh, I have a very, I do a podcast with Graham Linnen and a woman named Benji, who is a detransitioner. She's a lesbian, and for the longest time, she was identifying as a trans boy, a trans man. Yeah, and finally came to her senses. And she's a great activist for the rights of detransitioners. And, it's amazing.
Which is always a shock to me when I hear it. I haven't really experienced it, but, I grew up knowing lesbians, and there wasn't one that I knew that would ever want to be called a man or a boy or anything like that. And to see it now, it's like they've taken the spirit out of these kids.
Yeah, there's a great clip of Boy George. Remember Boy George in the 80s? Yeah. He was, obviously very gender bending, very effeminate, but he always, was adamant that he was still a guy. He was broadening the wavelength of what it means to be a man.
Just like Marsha Johnson.
Like who, sorry?
Marsha Johnson was
exactly
that he was a man.
Exactly.
And he could switch on a dime. I didn't know him personally, but I knew of him. And if he was in his guy mode, he was actually kind of brutal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was violent.
Oh, really? Wow. How did you know Marsha? Because you said even on the night of, you recognized him. So I guess you just...
The park there opposite the Stonewall was a hangout. And I used to walk by a couple of times a day between the bookshop and our apartment. And it was a place that we avoided because it was mostly, half in drag sex workers and that sort of thing. And we weren't drinkers, we weren't druggers. So, it just wasn't our community. Mm-hmm. And you would know these people by sight for their reputation, for their antics that you would see when they would spill out of the park and onto the street.
Yeah, okay, I can picture that. Yeah.
Yeah.
In some ways, that hasn't really changed. I live in a gay village, the gay community. So I wonder, have you spent any time, have you gone into New York City or into whatever big cities near you to any gay areas lately?
Montreal.
Oh, wow, cool. Montreal has a thriving gay village. It's big and yeah. Have you noticed? What would you say it's like now compared to then?
Much different. It was the gay village in New York was a much quieter place than gay villages around the world today. And I've been in a number of places, and there's no comparison really. The village back in the 1960s was a very sedate kind of place, and if there was a bar, you could walk by it and not know it was there unless you knew where it was.
Mm. Well, almost like
there were no flags. There were nothing, nothing distinguishing about them.
Yeah. Was there a big population of gays living downtown in New York?
Yeah, there were.
Sounds like it must have been quite an exciting time, obviously before the nightmare of the 1980s took hold. Yeah. But it must have been really thrilling. And you were genuine outsiders, like this. There was no gay press. There was no gay, like gays weren't featured in movies or television shows or anything. And gays really were outsiders. They lost their families and they lost their homes and their jobs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a small newsletter that we published back in the 1960s.
It was difficult even to distribute newsletters, wasn't it? Like it's just like really, you were committing crimes, I think.
Marsha P famously said about us that we were two guys with a newsletter.
Who said that? Sorry?
Martha Shelley.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. And the movement even before Stonewall.
Figures from that time.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about the homophile movement and the annual reminder, which was in Philadelphia. Is that right? Every year. Were you involved in you were involved in that stuff too, well before Stonewall?
No, I was supposed to go that year, but because of the riot, we kept the shop open because there was no internet then. There were, very few forms of communication. So all of a sudden, the shop during the riot and after the riot was flooded with people just trying to find out what was going on. So I stayed behind, and Craig went down, and basically he shut down that whole annual reminder business that year with a now famous fight with Frank Kameny.
Was the fight over like tactics kind of thing, or?
It was two women held hands. And
because he wanted to make sure everybody put on a presentation of like they wore suits, right? And they looked all conservative. And yeah, I talked about this. I did an interview with Benjamin Boyce, and I was trying to crash the Yeah. Yeah, things got a lot more militant after Stonewall, didn't they?
That's right.
And a lot more in your face. And I think that's what really did it. I think that's what really, I think the honesty was refreshing, It
brought so many people into the movement. It's very hard to describe. We felt very much alone prior to Stonewall. Mm-hmm. And then we were in the midst of a crowd, and it was great.
That must have been so thrilling. And I like that it was much more diverse in the sense that they were a lot more honest about that there are effeminate men and there are butch lesbians and that these people are on the outskirts of society. There's some fringe characters, and they were all open and honest about that. And I think that just really made it much more lively. Yeah, and they got all the headlines too. It worked. Things just the gay rights movement has been the most successful civil rights movement in all time, it seems. The speed with which society changed, the speed with which we got so many of our rights, right up until now.
There were so many things that were in place at the time that had just recently developed. There were student groups at different colleges in New York that we didn't realize at the time how well positioned we all were for that next step. And with Stonewall bringing in all those thousands of people that hadn't really considered gay rights before, in many cases didn't even know that there was a gay rights movement. Everything was in the right place at the right time to take advantage of that moment. A good example is the disturbances out in California. I forget the names of Compton something. and then there was a donut shop or something like that, and there were some disturbances with the police, but there was no movement in place to seize on that energy, and they just petered out. You know, there was a disturbance, and then the disturbance was over. Not the same with Stonewall. There was a disturbance, and that was just the start.
Yeah, it started a hurricane. Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. And then, of course, this horrible setback of the AIDS crisis. I think it's quite incredible that the movement survived that, in the sense that so many people, we lost so many people, of course, an entire generation is gone. But that, you know, there's a massive medical crisis affecting a minority of people who are really despised, a despised minority, that the gay community, the gay activists managed to fight despite that, and to get through that, I think is amazing, because that was a hell of a setback, obviously.
Right. It was a very difficult time. Very difficult. Yeah. I had retired and moved out to Provincetown, and basically all you were doing was helping people through their last days, and I lost every one of my friends there.
God, there's
none left.
Yeah, it's awful. Sorry. I'm glad I was born in 1978, and I didn't, I was outed in the early 90s, so I was on the other end of that crisis.
Yeah.
I was very lucky in that respect, obviously. And by then, the messaging around condoms was firmly established and stuff like that. So, things started. We have, in my city, there's an AIDS memorial that has like a, no, sorry. I'll cut that part out. I'm getting all choked up. Let's move on. Tell me something else. Tell me, how has it been since December? You've been active online. How's it been?
I went into this expecting that I was going to get pushback, and I got every bit as much as I thought I was going to get. I'm now labeled as a racist. I'm definitely called a transphobe. When I ask people, well, what does that mean to you, and how does that apply to me, I never get a straight answer. Well, I can just look at your timeline and I can tell. Well, tell me about my timeline. What in it is transphobic? And I never get a straight answer about that. The racism charge is part of what is being done to try to create the impression that there's something wrong with this person. I've been working with a family down south whose son was murdered by a trans man. And no one knows really the extent of what I've been doing down there. All they know is that I said that the person who was ultimately apprehended and drew a gun on a police officer was shot, and their killing spree was ended on the spot. I said that was a good thing. Well, that's been reinterpreted to say I said it was a good thing that this person was shot and killed. No, I said it was a good thing that the killing spree ended there. And I've continued to work with the family. But that's not what you read in Pink News.
No, yeah. Well, it's a good thing that Pink News it seems to be on its way out. It seems to be losing readership, and it's untrustworthy.
Anything I can do to help in that regard, I'm going to try to
do. Yeah, I hear you. I think all I want to do is just ignore them. I think they're getting more. I think all this controversy they're stirring up is the only thing keeping them all around right now. Really,
Yeah, well, they are very much targeting LGBT youth. Part of what they're doing now is going into Snapchat and creating a platform that appeals to kids.
Oh gosh, that's terrible. It's more grooming.
That's exactly what they're doing.
And they're trying to tell them all that they're trans, of course, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder how long it's going to take. I can feel the tide is turning. I know that this fad is not going to last forever, because we are never going to live in a society where male and female don't exist anymore. But how long do you think it's going to take? It's like this really large ship that is just slowly turning. And I'm just waiting and waiting,
One of the advantages of age is that you get to see things over a period of time. And to me, this is a social contagion. And I've seen them come and I've seen them go. And this one's definitely going to go because
Yeah.
the basis for it is so thin.
Yeah, that's so true. You must have seen, saw the multiple personality fad come and go.
Oh,
You
yeah.
saw the satanic panic and recovered memories. This does look a lot like those, doesn't it?
I watched good police methodology collapse during some of the satanic stuff where they didn't follow the basics of what you would do as an investigator and instead crossed over and actually facilitated the continuing panic. So, and it's past.
Yeah, now to our viewers, the satanic panic was when it had been decided that there were all of these people who had in childhood been used in satanic rituals and sexually abused, and their memories had been suppressed and erased. Is that right?
That's right. That's right.
And then, so all these people were suddenly discovering that they had recovered these memories of having been ritually sexually abused in satanic rituals by relatives and, by parents and friends of parents and things like that. But it was all just it was a psychological phenomenon. None of it was true, right?
Yeah, and when investigators started crossing over into helping people discover their memories rather than just investigate, that's when they made the situation worse. So, law enforcement learned from that. But again, there's always a cost to all of this, and it can be considerable for many people.
Yeah, and doesn't that look like the way medical professionals have crossed over and they're not doing their medical duty to protect these young patients anymore? They're putting them on drugs that have terrible side effects. And they're not using the proper precautions around these drugs, like puberty blockers. In no other field of medicine would puberty blockers be thrown at kids that quickly, surgeries, like unnecessary surgeries to remove healthy body parts on children who aren't old enough to make any kind of decision. And they're all jumping on board.
Just the very idea of a medical person saying, yes, you may have been wrong. You may have been born in the wrong body. They know they weren't born in the wrong body. They were born in their right body. They were born in the body that they were going to have.
Yeah, and we're in the midst of a social phenomenon where people are saying, they were interpreting gender nonconformity to mean we need to make your body resemble a member of the opposite sex, to maintain the status quo, essentially. Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? Yeah. Well, again, we're nearing the 1 hour mark, so we should probably wrap this up. But is there anything else you want to say? First, I want to give a shout out to the LGBT Alliance. I'm so glad you wore the shirt. I'm so glad that they exist as an organization, and I want to do everything I can to help them grow.
I'm very proud of what they've done and how they're leading this effort. And I call what's going on in the UK the front lines at the moment. There's certainly much work that needs to be done here, but right now that's where I'm focusing my efforts because of the different issues that are being presented both in government and in medicine that we need to tackle right at this moment.
Yeah, and I think the States is so polarized right now and is so busy handling the catastrophe in Washington that maybe the U.S. is just not ready to turn its attention towards this issue. So let's get this all sorted out in the U.K. and then we'll have a wonderful model for what to apply to other countries. Of course, I'm in Canada.
I don't know if you saw, but a group just formed in Norway.
Oh, really?
LLH 2019. And I did a little bit on Twitter yesterday about them, put out their English press release and that sort of thing. But to me, it's encouraging to see this growing in Europe as it is. There are other groups, very small that are starting to speak with each other in the EU. But that's the first one that's come along outside of the UK.
I'm glad to see that it's one of these Scandinavian ultra-liberal countries, ultra-progressive countries, because I want to get that message across first and foremost, that it's progressive people and progressive values are what make me opposed to this. So when you can point out that it's Sweden is turning around and Norway is turning around, and then countries like Iran are the one, and Pakistan, which are very homophobic, very religious conservative countries, theocracies, are the ones jumping into trans. I think it's a stark reminder to people. You know?
That should be the red flag right there.
Yeah, when your politics are aligned with Iran, and mine are aligned with Sweden and Norway, then maybe you shouldn't be calling me a Christian conservative. You know? Yeah. Yeah. So why don't we? Yeah. It's been so great talking to you. You're really one of my heroes, and I'm so glad you're back online in this fight. You're making a huge, huge difference, and I'm always so amazed to hear about gay history. There's so little of it out there, and there's so little that's known. So it's just so amazing to have someone in the flesh.
I just started a website that, you know, it's really in the development stage, but I'll be putting things up, you know, longer form pieces than you can do on Twitter at fredsargeant.com.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to be sharing the heck out of that. I mean, yeah, that's going to be amazing. I can't wait to read. Tell us everything. I want to know what it was like. I want to know what the mood was like. What, you know, it was such an amazing time. Even right through, you know, everything you've been doing for this. Yeah. Well, I hope the weather's not too hot in Vermont today. I'm in Canada.
It's horrible here.
Oh, it's so hot. I'm dying.
It's horrible.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's so brutal.
It's been in the 90s for the last 3 days.
Oh, I'm a Celsius guy. I don't know what that means, but it sounds high.
Yeah, it's very bad, and I fall over in the heat now.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. Yeah, I have some friends who can't go outside at all. It's just too hot. They have to sit down, and yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again for this chat. I'm going to press the stop button, and I'm going to post this